It is my honour and privilege tonight to introduce you to Fawzia Koofi, who is undoubtedly the leading woman in Afghan politics today. Fawzia has had a somewhat incredible life story. I think when I was writing the book, I remember thinking that if it was fiction, you wouldn't believe it. She's had a life that you really couldn't make up. It's been an incredible journey, from a baby left outside in the sun to die because she was an unwanted girl, to becoming the first woman in her family to go to school, to be educated, the first Afghan woman to work for the United Nations during Taliban time, and then one of the first female MPs in the new democratic Afghanistan. So her life has very much been one that has been punctuated by being the first to break those barriers. And she really now wants to break the ultimate barrier, which is to be the first female president of Afghanistan. And I think it's fair to say that the book is part Fawzia's personal story, but it's also very much the political message that she wants to give the world about Afghanistan and about how she would lead the country if she were given the chance. So very much because there's so many of you here tonight, and I'm sure everybody's got lots of questions. So I'll just sort of open the conversation with Fawzia and then very quickly hand over to the audience for questions. I guess the first question is, why did you decide to write a book about yourself?
Well, thank you very much, Nadine, and let me say it's an honor to be here among these wonderful people, and of course some of my old friends from Afghanistan. And I heard so highly about this place and the participants, so I hope we will have a good discussion tonight. For most of what goes in the book, I think, Nadine, you should also be, given the credit, because you helped me in writing the book, and we were together in journey to different parts of Afghanistan to get a true test of my childhood experience. And I remember traveling to my village. I have some people from my province here. 2 days and night non-stop, and Nadine and I was traveling to get to my village to get a true taste of my childhood and the place I was grown up, and I was born as a unwanted girl. Well, the reason for me to write the book is basically two reasons. First of all, around the world, women of Afghanistan are regarded as poor women of Afghanistan. When you say poor, it means women who can't do basically much. We just need to sympathy them. We need to, always help them, which is not always the case. Women of Afghanistan are poor, but they are strong, and there are so many role models in this book, and one of that could be my mother, who was illiterate, but she was very strong in taking care of the family, and especially when my father was killed, to kind of help us to go to school and be where we are now. So they are poor, but they are strong. They are, their strength is a determination of what they do. So this was the first reason, to give a different view of Afghan women. And the second reason was, again, Afghanistan is always regarded as a poor country, poor Afghanistan, that we have to sympathize. But I think it's just beyond that. I think Afghanistan has great potentials, economy and politically. It's not just a country that produces war and terrorism. There is other face of Afghanistan which could be a reliable partner to the world and to its citizens. It's a country full of culture and full of tradition and full of values. The family value, extended relationship. If it was not the family values and the strong protection system in Afghanistan of the family, I think after the 33 years of war and conflict, we had so much social problems now, like street children, women who actually don't have anybody to help them. But because of all those values we had in Afghanistan, we don't have such problem like you have in other post-war countries, social problem. And that face of Afghanistan needed to be kind of demonstrated to the world, and that's why I decided to write the book.
You talk about family values, but then at the same time in the book you describe very graphically your father beating your mother and the suffering that your mother endured at the hands of your father. How do you reconcile those values with your own beliefs?
Well, it's I think three generations after when when violence was part of the tradition and culture, domestic violence. Although it's happening now and it's happening to the brutal level, but back by then when my mother was a house lady and my father was alive, many of the violence was regarded as part of love and ownership, which I can't understand now, of course, but. Because my mother was kind of the deputy manager of my father in the house, so for her to receive more attention, to be beaten was a sign of more attention that she received from my father, which of course changed over the time. Neither me nor my daughters will accept that. But there was another face of my father, which was the political face, and he, for that face, was my role model. A very strong, outspoken, very connected to his people. That was the face of his politics. And I think all the stress and tensions that I undergo sometimes in Afghanistan politics, sometimes I can give him I wouldn't blame him for what he did personally at his personal life, but I think most of what he did was not the right thing, and I wouldn't admire that.
You mentioned your father there. Both your father and your grandfather were members of parliament, so you come from a political dynasty. Do you think the fact that you do come from a political dynasty would be enough for Afghans to accept a female president?
If you look at Afghanistan neighbors, for instance, Pakistan or Bangladesh, even India, although there is a lot of difference between Afghanistan democracy and Indian democracy, it's much more established democracy. Most of these female leaders, the prime ministers in these countries, actually come from political families. First time I was elected in parliament in 2005 was because of my family legacy, because of who my father was and because of who I was from a family background. So the family legacy was there, and I think that's the base of politics in a traditional country like Afghanistan. You have to have a political legacy of your family for yourself to prove yourself. But in 2010, it was my own name. Not anymore I was elected because of my father, but because of who I was. And even my brothers were initially called, and all of us were called as the son and the daughter of my father. But now sometimes my brothers are called as my brother. So kind of we changed the identity, because a man is called under the name and identity of a woman, and that's a generation change, I think, a perspective change.
You had to battle quite hard with your own brothers, didn't you, throughout your life, in order to go to school, but then also to become the family's political representative, because one of your brothers wanted to be the family representative. You had to. Can you tell us about that story?
Yeah. Well, as you rightly said, starting or being the first to do everything, being the first to go to school, being the first to come to politics in your family, you have to first kind of face the cultural barrier within your family before you go to the society. And I had to win an internal election in the family before I won a national election in the parliament. And I had to, beat those men who were in the family as, kind of trying to create problem.
If I can just interrupt there, she not only won the internal family election, she made all her brothers sign a piece of paper so that it was in writing.
Yeah. But now they changed. In the last parliamentary election in 2010, they were not anymore they didn't feel guilty if they support me, because they were honored. I mean, they tell me that we could now proudly support you for politics. And I think that was something I wanted to achieve.
And do you think the country really would be ready for you?
I think this question came more than 100 times from different journalists and media, and I keep saying the same answer, and I want to repeat this here. It's the mindset we make. I know the challenges are there. I know that Afghanistan's social, political, and economic structures are being controlled by these traditional leaders who rule the country for centuries. If you look at it from that perspective, it's very difficult for a woman to lead a country which is full of arm and weapon, and it's very difficult to talk about rule of law or about democracy. So from that perspective, it is very difficult. But in the meantime, we need to look at the other side of Afghanistan, which is this progressive part of the society, all this young generation, women who would like to change, they're pro-democracy, they would like to live to the basic standards of life. And if you honestly speak to them and deliver your message, I think they will accept it. In the last parliamentary election in 2010, there was huge challenges, and I was running from a province which strategically is also very important, politically and strategically. I had very strong opponents. Certainly, there were certain elements who didn't want me to come to parliament. They did everything from terrorizing my political character to everything else, but this never affected the public view, and I got top votes of women all over Afghanistan. So I think the silent majority of women who are population as a whole, not only women, who lack strong leaders to represent them. They want changes, but there is no strong leaders to represent and kind of progress that change. I think they will support me, and I think we need to also, if women in Pakistan and in Bangladesh or other Islamic countries can be the leader, why not in Afghanistan?
The risks yourself are undoubtedly great. There are many threats against your life, and you've survived several assassination attempts already. And the book begins with a letter that you write to your daughters, instructing them what to do if you don't come home that night, if you get killed that day. A lot of people have said that they found that incredibly shocking, that a mother could be so honest with her daughters about that. I mean, how do you prepare them for the fact that you might not be here one day?
Well, I wrote actual letters to my daughters before I start thinking about writing a book. These were kind of the farewell letters, and why I started writing the farewell letters was because you're never sure about living in a country which politically but also physically your life is at risk. You're never sure what's going to happen in the next moment, and I, especially because of the positions I had, was more at risk. So I was never sure what's going to happen tomorrow. I didn't want to leave my children in a situation where they didn't have a father, and I want them to take my legacy, as I did my father's legacy. I want them to realize that it's important to live, but if you die for leaving something good behind, you pave the way for others for a change. It's worth it. And I want them to understand that even if I'm killed, but I leave something behind for them to follow, that's a honor for me. And they should always work for change. I mean, that's the whole thing I wanted to leave to my daughters. But then many of my friends advised me to put them in a book, because that messages in that book is not only for my daughters, but for other women and girls in Afghanistan, because first of all, it also emphasized on the importance of education. If I was not educated, you can imagine there are hundreds and thousands of Afghan women who have experienced the same life as me, even much harder. But I'm in a way a success story because I at least managed to raise my voice. Their voices have never been heard, but my voice at least can get to somewhere. So with all the suffers I have experienced in my 36 years of life, I still can represent those women whose voices have been unheard. So I want, through the book, through the messages, through my political work, to represent those unheard voices. And that's why I thought it's important for the world and for my daughters to understand how important education is. I'm a success story because I got education, because I was educated. And I wanted my daughters to understand that. Initially, it was not easy for me to go to school because everybody except my mother was opposing me. And I always had to be to the standard of everybody's expectations. To my brother and everybody's expectation, I always had to bring the first position result sheet in my house. So you see how difficult for a woman is to prove herself. She has to work triple and double harder to prove that she can equally, be a capable person in the society. And I had to always be to the standard of everybody to allow me to go to school.
Do you think you chose politics, or did politics choose you?
Well, coming from a political family, I think politics was in my gene anyways, because we paid a high price for being in politics. My father was killed, my brothers were killed, my husband passed away, but he got diseases from the prison during Taliban. In a way, the whole life that I have been through, the discrimination, injustice, and the whole discriminative life, in a way, will take me to politics, because that was in my blood. But I decided to come to politics after 2001 because there was an opportunity for women. And I thought that I could at least change some of those bad aspects of life that I have experienced for other women. That's why I choose to come to politics. But I think it was already in my blood.
And the final question from me before we open it to the floor. Change is happening in Afghanistan one way or the other. Foreign forces are pulling out. The Americans have announced their intention to fully withdraw by 2014. What are your biggest fears for the country as this process happens?
With the transition and with the so-called peace process, the concern of women and the young generation and the intellectuals in Afghanistan is the gains we have had in the past 10 years and 11 years. We will lose those gains. One of that is the woman situation. Women are always, their rights will easily be compromised because they are not the troublemakers. They can't make trouble for the country. Women in Afghanistan have never been involved in destruction of the country. They have never destroyed, and their hands are never involved in bleeding of the citizens of the country. So they are not troublemakers, and it's very easy for anybody to ignore women. And for me, the concern is that once we go back to those dark periods of Taliban, I think we will not go back to that period because the population awareness and the political knowledge has increased. In 1996, when Taliban first came, many people welcomed them because they didn't know what the real identity of Taliban is. I think after being ruled by Taliban for 6 years, as a woman, as a Muslim woman, I know what does it mean to live under Taliban. And there are many women and men like me who don't want to go back to dark period. But, in a political deal, which is happening right now, and with the withdrawal of international forces, in the worst case scenario, it's possible that if Taliban are brought back to power through a deal, there will be certain elements in Afghanistan that will oppose this Talibanization. And so in the worst case scenario, my fear is that the civil war will begin again.
Thank you. If you have a question, you want to put your hand up and I'll come to everybody. Yep.
Hi, I'm a lawyer from Pakistan, and I'm very grateful that you've come here, and I'm very privileged to hear you speak today because I have great sympathy for Afghan women and also great regard for their resilience. One of the questions I wanted to ask you is that do you think that being a politician, the fact that political parties are not really allowed to operate in Afghanistan, especially since the coalition came in, do you not think that this will create a vacuum, especially when the coalition forces go, and would be a hindrance for Afghanis to sort of stand up on their own feet? For example, in Pakistan, we have strong now political parties, and that have created a strong democracy in a way because political parties have been there for a long time. Thank you.
Thank you. The question is important about political parties. I don't agree that we don't have strong political parties in Afghanistan. There are political parties who have been functioning for 30 to 40 years in Afghanistan. Now, our electoral system is in a way that it's single non-transferable vote. So the parties don't have a space in the electoral system, but they have a space in the society of Afghanistan. I think it's important, if we're talking about decentralization of power in Afghanistan, it's important that we promote political parties, not for withdrawal of international troops, because in case of withdrawal of international troops, the whole state will be at risk. But for the future of democracy, we need to promote political parties in Afghanistan. And especially if you're talking about having a parliamentary system in Afghanistan, it's important that we have political parties that are officially recognized in the electoral system. We do have political parties. Some of the political parties don't have, people are not happy with them. They don't have good experience. You know, they have been involved in conflict and war. But at the end of the day, there are structures we have political parties as old as 60 years that are now functioning. We need to pave the way for them. And I think this is one of the responsibility of the parliament. In a few months' time, we will discuss the electoral law. And I think we will reform it in a way that we have a proportional representation of party in the political system of Afghanistan.
Well, it's fascinating to meet you and listen to you. And I do hope that I am wrong, because I don't think you stand much of a chance as a president. But I hope I am totally wrong. I really wish that. But I have few things which boggle in my mind, to be honest. First of all, is that what's the percentage of women who are privileged like you in Afghanistan, who comes from such a background and being able to work and travel and all of this? The other thing is that, do you really believe, I mean, recently I watched a film which is Afghanistan. I don't know if you have seen it, if you have watched it, about the struggle of a couple of women to become stars, you know, singers or something like that, and the reaction of the society.
Idol on Afghanistan.
Yeah, the Afghan star, yes. And you could see the reaction of the society, you know, to these women. So I can imagine the struggle is so big. But the most important is that if, and I wish you do, you become a president, what, in your opinion, is the top priority issues concerning women's rights in Afghanistan, beside education? I mean, there are so many, I mean, you have domestic violence, you have the bigamy, you have the right of inheritance for women, and mostly, and on top of that, is underage marriages. So how you are gonna try to balance your political career with defending women's rights? Thank you.
Well, I wouldn't expect from a woman to say Afghanistan doesn't have a chance for a woman president. Let the man to say that. Okay, no, I was just teasing. It's okay. Anyways, on the issue of woman problem, I think there are some problem that have a link to the history, and we shouldn't expect them to be changed over time. Many of the issues you raise are there for centuries. The issue of early marriage and forced marriage, or multi-marriage without respecting the Sharia, honor killing, for instance.
But the Sharia does allow beginning.
Yeah, without respecting. What I said is like without providing justice and the conditions which is there in the Sharia. Sometimes multi-marriage happen without respecting that verse that it says you can marry more than one times if you can provide justice and equality for.
How do you interpret the following verse which says وَمَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ? And you know precisely what this means.
I don't know Arabic, so if you could interpret this in English.
Translate it.
مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ, it means, which is the continuation of the same ayat, okay, which means that the women, you can have them like, I mean, Saudis have interpreted to mates in the palace, where they can sleep with them. And King Abdulaziz have already... Harim, yeah, you are allowed to sleep with your harims. And I mean, the president is King... Yeah.
You're not quizzing her on the Quran, you're asking her about her political activity.
Well, she started.
But I think it's
let me come to this. Well, in Islam, you're allowed to marry more than one times, up to 4 times, if you can bring justice. But it emphasizes that you need to one is enough, unless you have a real problem. And this is what is also in our law, in our civil law and other laws in Afghanistan. And there is a recent law that we are working on it, law on violence against women. We try to minimize the risk of marrying without proper justice, So there are some problems that are linked to history, and we cannot change them overnight. But there are some problems that are man-made problem for women in Afghanistan. Like depriving from education rights, like depriving from right to work. These are a production of war. And something which was imposed to Afghan women during war. So our focus is to change those issues in the short term that are made by man or a production of war. Like, why can't a woman go to school? in Islam, the basis for Islam, the Iqra, was read and write. You know, Taliban, as somebody who was holding the flag of Islam, they deprived women from the basic rights which was stated in Islam. They deprived women from going to school. So we are trying to initially intervene on those short-term issues that were brought to women as a result of war and conflict in Afghanistan. In the meantime, we are also working in Afghanistan to tackle the issue of cultural issues, for instance, forced marriages. Although, you know, in Islam, the agreement of the two sides is the condition for a legal marriage. But culturally, traditionally, they impose husbands on women without the agreement of the woman. And forced marriage seems to be a big problem in Afghanistan. As a result, a lot of self-immolation happens, a lot of domestic violence happens. Just recently, before coming to here, there was a case of Sahar Gul, who was a famous case. She was, 15 years old girl who was tortured brutally by her family, her husband's family at home. These are the issues that we need to really educate society. We need to change laws. We need to amend laws, and we are working in the parliament for that. Now, as a woman president, I think many of the woman problems are interlinked to each other. So if you educate a woman, you basically strengthen her economy and make her self-independence. And then you could help her get out of all these cultural barriers, forced marriages, early marriages. So there are many issues that are interlinked to each other. And as woman, not only as a president, but as woman, as parliamentarian, as a woman activist, my priorities are to educate a woman, but also to educate man, because that's important for a brother to allow her sister to go to school. I was just talking today in one of the other events, and I said the difference of my generation and my daughter's generation is the choices. When I was a young girl, a teenager, my struggle was to go to school. My brothers wouldn't allow me to go to school. Now my daughter's struggle is to go to the best school in Afghanistan. So it's a matter of choice, in generation time that we are making. And I think through the time you will be able to achieve it, provided that there is a strong political commitment for changes in Afghanistan. Because I think over the past 5 years, the political focus has changed. Initially, there was a lot of support for women, nationally, but also internationally. But right now, the focus has shifted to reconciliation and talks and negotiations with Taliban. So I think we need to have strong commitment from the governments to be able to bring changes. But also, it's important that we bring changes from the community, like bottom-up approach. That's the key. That's the difference also. During the communist-backed regime, all the changes were coming from top to bottom. Right now, many of the women movements actually mobilize themselves from the community level. So not easily we can ignore them.
This does raise interesting points, Fawzia. I remember you once joked to me that being labelled a feminist is one of the biggest insults anybody could give an Afghan. You would describe yourself as a feminist, wouldn't you? But at the same time, you are a very strong Muslim, and you believe in Sharia law, for example. How do those two things work together, those two sides of you?
I think it's true that we are fighting for Islamic rights of women, because I think that has not been given to women. There is a lot of misuse of Islam and mixing it with culture and tradition when it comes to women issues. Taliban regime was just an example, but those conservative part of elements in the society, because we never had in Islam history women interpreters of Islam. Islam was always interpreted by man. So what we want to give to women is a true Islam by the definition which is in Quran, not by definition which is from a man perspective. I'm trying to, in this law which I told you, the law on violence against women, we're trying to give women the Islamic rights, but this law has also been, like myself, been labeled as a Western law. So the thing is that if you want to go for Islamic rights, true Islamic rights of women, there are some people who believe that they're losing power. If women get to that point, that they ask for their Islamic rights. And I think that's why I emphasize on education, because if you really educate women, they could challenge the man for their Islamic rights. And I think what we are asking is basically an true Islamic rights, which is not mixed and politicized with culture and tradition.
So you don't think being a Muslim is at odds with being a feminist?
I don't know if you can call me feminist, but I have, dare to stand for women's rights, but still be a Muslim.
I think we have a. What do you got? Gentleman here at the front.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum. I'm from Pakistan and I practice as a barrister here in London, and it's a privilege to hear you speak today. You're obviously a very courageous person and you deserve all the support. Following on from what you just said, given that the majority of people in politics are men and religion is so prone to misinterpretation and selective appropriation, would it make more sense to have a secular state rather than where there is less opportunity for religion to be interpreted in ways where arranged marriage is seen as the same as forced marriage when they're two entirely separate things? And that's just one example. Or is that something that you think Afghanistan isn't ready for? They may be prepared to accept a woman president because they've got the example of Benazir Bhutto and Khaleda Zia, but perhaps secularism is asking too much at this stage anyway.
Before going to that state, I mean, there are many successful states who have been Muslim state, but in the meantime secular, like Turkey and other examples. But I think in Afghanistan, we need to educate society first, because many societies are so closed and so traditional that when you talk about secularism and separation of politics from religion, they immediately think that you're unbeliever. So I think you need to prepare the ground for that. You need to really educate society. In a closed society like Afghanistan, I think the priority would be other issues at this stage. The priority perhaps would be to increase awareness about the role of citizens and about the role of religion in a citizen. But I think there are certain elites in political arena of Afghanistan that they start talking about this issue. Although right now it's an Islamic state, Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. But I think there are many strong examples that we could apply in Afghanistan. I mean, good examples that we could apply in Afghanistan, but we need some time for that.
My name is Rafi Fazil. I'm an Afghan activist. I admire your courage and determination for putting yourself forward as a candidate for next presidential election in Afghanistan. And I'm genuinely concerned about the future of democracy in Afghanistan. And my question is, with NATO's withdrawal and the international community's unwillingness to bankroll the next election, how sure are we, the Afghans, that A, there will be an election, and B, it will be fair and free? Thank you.
That's a very important question. I think that's key. I think one of the priorities for both our partners internationally, but for the government of Afghanistan, is to ensure that there is a fair and fine election. And then that's in the best case scenario if we have elections in 2014 and that elections result a change of leadership. And then this shift of power and transition happened through a smooth political process. There is a lot of uncertainty right now, you're right, because many people are not sure in Afghanistan that this early withdrawal, without properly ending this war, in Afghanistan will actually result a sustainable democracy and growth of political institutions in Afghanistan. That's the concern of everybody. We are all concerned for different reasons. I and other women, we are concerned for losing what we have achieved so far by, through a political deal, not a political process, giving more power to Taliban and Talibanization once again. Others are concerned for different reasons, but I think you're right. The priority for us and for our international allies should be to ensure that there is a proper transition, politically and military. Politically, transition will include a fair and fine election in 2014, a new government. A change of leadership itself will create a lot of hope and optimism. And if we have a strong leadership and a shift of power towards strong team, of course, I'm sure they will be able to bring lots of changes and a lot of hope to the society. But the question you raise, how do we survive politically from now till 2014, is a key question, because with all this Qatar office, the Doha process, etc., a lot of focus on the so-called peace process raise this question of, like, are we going to really trust the democracy process in Afghanistan and democratic institutions, or are we going to bring certain individuals and certain groups under the name of Talib, share power with them undemocratically? That's the concern we have. And I hope that our partners, our allies will listen to Afghans, because you cannot put on one side of the table a mullah and the other side of the table Americans, and you pretend that this is a peace process. Where is Afghans in this process? Afghans needs to be in the table on this process.
We'll just take the lady here, and then I'll move to the back.
Assalamu alaikum. If I was Afghani, I would vote for you. If the process was corrupt, I would vote for you 1,000 times.
Oh, that's very nice.
Have you studied the models of female leadership in the West? Because we've just had an interesting film made of one of our great political leaders, Margaret Thatcher, and what she did was to get men who had become destructive in their thought and remove them from the political agenda and empower a completely different section of society to become leaders. It was what I would call a maternal view of politics. Interestingly, there have been very few female leaders since then, because she was not interested in the feminine agenda. She was interested in enabling the best out of men. I'm very glad to hear you have brothers.
Margaret Thatcher and other leaders like her.
Well, I admire all the women leaders around the world. I put in my book also, I admire Margaret Thatcher along with other leaders, that I named them in my book, not because of their political beliefs, but because of the strong characters they had, ruling countries at very difficult situation. It's not easy. Speaking your mind, breaking the taboos, living to your values in any country for a woman is difficult. To be the first is much more difficult. And I think these women did a wonderful job to change the world.
I think you talked about your childhood to political heroines when you were a child. You recalled watching TV, and I think Margaret Thatcher and Indira Gandhi were the two key ones, weren't they?
Yeah. But I admire all women leaders around the world because I think it's not easy to be a woman politician. And even when Benazir Bhutto was assassinated, it made me cry because, it was, at the end of the day, she was killed for being a politician, but she was more vulnerable for being a woman politician.
How hard is it for you? Because certainly within the Afghan arena, one of the easiest ways for your critics to undermine your political credibility is to attack you because you're a woman. So is to accuse you of impropriety or to accuse you of immoral behaviour, or to create false rumours about you. How hard is that for you on a personal level to deal with those sort of dirty tricks, if you like, but undermining you because you're a woman?
That's the most difficult part of my life, because when somebody wants to kill you, is like finish you physically. But somebody wants to terrorize your character. You're still alive. You see that somebody is misinterpreting you. And I think being a woman, nobody criticized me for my political beliefs, because that's obvious. Everybody knows about them. They cannot misinterpret my statement. But certainly they can talk against my personal career because I'm a woman. And I think all over the world, nobody talks about women's political views, but they talk about women's clothes, for instance. It's very easy to talk about a woman's scarf, but because that is the vulnerable part of their life. Personal life is something not many people see it, so it's easy to talk about it, and that has become. I think that's a main part, challenging part of my life and many women politicians' life in Afghanistan. Especially, I appreciate freedom of speech, but sometimes some people misuse that. It becomes very difficult. There should be limits for everything, and when it comes to talking against women, I think some people don't respect any limits. They go talking to the limit that they can destroy a woman.
Okay, I think I promised the lady at the back there first. Yeah, and then we'll come.
Hello, my name is Farhana Popal. I'm originally from Afghanistan, and what's clear is that peace talks are the way forward for Afghanistan. Peace talks with the Taliban are the key part in order to bring peace and stability to Afghanistan. Any president who fails to acknowledge that will fail as a president. Now, Khalzai bin Pashtun, who's from Kandahar, is from the same tribal backgrounds as the Taliban. The Taliban are still failing to cooperate with him. Do you honestly believe that, hypothetically, you became the president of Afghanistan as a woman? Do you feel that the Taliban would talk to you? Do you honestly believe that you will be the person to bring peace and stability to Afghanistan, to a country that has no understanding of human rights or women's values? Do you honestly believe that we are ready for such a person? Because, in my opinion, I don't think we are at all in any shape or form. And I think, personally, by a woman running for Afghanistan, a woman president running for Afghanistan will actually be a further hindrance in the road to peace and stability of Afghanistan.
So take the first point. Take the first point first, which was the lady's view was that bringing the Taliban into peace talks is the only way to move forward. Would you agree
allow
with
me
that?
to disagree with that, because we need to differentiate between two. First of all, not necessarily talking with Taliban will bring peace in Afghanistan. Because I don't actually believe that Taliban are an Afghan agenda. Taliban were created outside Afghanistan. They're following agendas, and Afghanistan have been a battlefield between regional powers in Afghanistan. And even those Taliban who would like to actually join the peace process, they're either being arrested or being killed, because there are certain networks, who would like, who benefit this project, who benefit this conflict project. The case of Mullah Baradar is just a small example. He wanted to join the peace process, the so-called peace process, and he was arrested, or he, received trouble. So I don't believe that the only way forward for Afghanistan is actually talking with Taliban. I agree with you on a principle. Peace is a principle, and nobody will disagree with you on that. I agree with you that the only way forward for Afghanistan is to live together on a peace. But talking to Taliban, knowing that they are actually implementing agendas of other countries. Today, if you bring Taliban to share power with them, if certain countries don't see their interest in that, they will go to create another project. Remember when the Mujahedeen were fighting against Soviet, all of these countries were supporting Mujahedeen. When Mujahedeen get to power and they didn't listen to some of these countries, they went to establish and create Taliban against Mujahedeen. Now, if Taliban are brought to power and a political deal is made with them, there will be another project to destabilize Afghanistan, because certain countries believe that a destabilized Afghanistan is in their interest, economically and politically. And also, certain countries believe that because one country has a good relationship with Afghanistan, they need to destabilize Afghanistan. So we have basically been a battlefield between all of these powers. So I think it will be a mistake for us to say the only way forward would be to talk with Taliban. Taliban certainly don't want to talk with President Karzai, because he was the one who initiated this peace talk, because they think he's a puppet, which is, that's what they think. They would like to talk with United States, because they get political identity by talking with United States. They, with the Doha office, with the Qatar office, which was initiated by United States, they actually get closer to resources, political and financial resources, and I'm sure they become even stronger, and their source of networks and their source of support will even expand. So they would like to talk to those who are the first decision makers. At this stage, they believe that and they want to make a political deal to release their prisoners, first of all, and to get a political impunity, so to say. And they wouldn't get that from President Karzai, so why should they talk to President Karzai? Or why should they talk to anybody like me? Because they want to rule the country. They don't want to share power.
I'm sorry, can I interject? I met with the Taliban, like near enough a year ago now. I met with Ahmad Wakil, the former Taliban foreign minister. I met with Mullah Zaif. I met with Rabbani. I've met these people and I've spoken to them. Now, their aim in the peace process is not to become the leaders of Afghanistan. Rather, it's to bring peace and stability to Afghanistan. Now, when you hear this firsthand from the Taliban, I went to Kandahar and I traveled to Helmand. I've spoken to these individuals. Now, this is, in my opinion, a Western misconception. The Taliban are not here to start another war. They don't want to be the leaders of Afghanistan. Rather, they want to be represented in Afghan parliament. They want to represent the people of Afghanistan, and they should be brought to the table, because whether we like it or not, there are Afghan people who follow the Taliban, who believe in their political identity and that political party. Therefore, they need representation. Therefore, it will be to say that it's just regional actors and their identity. That's not true.
Can you let Fawzia respond to the point that
the people you name? We don't have problem with them. They're actually sitting in Kabul and they're enjoying as much good life as more than me, because they travel around the world. They publish, they publish books and they write books and they write, memoirs. So I don't think they have any problem with the world or with me. We're talking about Taliban, led by Mullah Omar. It's a group which would like to rule the country. They have their three conditions, Taliban as a group. The first condition is Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan. They don't want Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. They want Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan. The second condition is Islamic women rights. Living under Taliban, living my whole life in Afghanistan, but in particularly under Taliban, I know what does that mean. And I don't think that even women in Kandahar and in Helmand want their daughters to suffer as much as they suffered during Taliban. I think they deserve. We cannot have double standard in Afghanistan. We cannot say that in one part of the country, women deserve to send their girls to school, but in another part of the country, it's just because we want Taliban rule, we shouldn't allow women to go to school. So it's a double standard. I think women even in Kandahar would like to see their girls and their daughters to go to school. And although there was threats, there was risks. Women were attacked by acid. The girl students were attacked by acid in the faces in Kandahar, but still girls go to school. I think that's a woman voice in different parts of the country speaking. Now, if Taliban would like to be part of a political process, they would like to come to the parliament. They are more than welcome to be part of a political process. Go participate in the elections. If they win, well done. We will all, give them applause. But it's not that we give them seats just because they're Taliban, just because they want to go to ask for their rights through violence means.
Do you trust the Taliban would you trust the Taliban within the political process? Do you trust, for example, that the lady was saying that her belief is that they want to share. They don't want to lead the country, but they want to be represented. Do you believe that?
I hope that this will actually come from Taliban. If Taliban come forward publicly, say that we want to share power, we want to participate in a political process. This is something we dream for, but Taliban have never said so. They even don't want to talk to the government, which is a democratically elected government, because they believe this is a puppet. They want to, go for their rights through violence means. And in the past years, the response we get in the peace process from Taliban is always violence. I mean, last year, look at all the leaders were killed, or like the series of killing of the leaders who have had strong connection in the communities. That means they would like to, first of all, morally control Afghanistan and then politically control Afghanistan. If they want to, there are some Taliban who have accepted to be part of the democratic process, who have accepted to be in the parliament, and we have no problem with them. I mean, there are other groups in the parliament who have a background of conflicts, but as long as they have accepted a constitution, women had no problem with them. And we have some of those individuals in the parliament who sit with us under the same roof, sometimes use the same color of card as I do. Green or red cards. We have no problem for them, but it's important that Taliban come forward and they speak publicly about what they want. What's their definition of Islamic rights of women? Now, it happens that some of also our ministers within the government say that Taliban will allow women to go to school. It's always important to hear this from Taliban so that we trust them. You know, if you don't hear from this, and there are different spokesperson of Taliban, everybody talks on behalf of Taliban, how do we trust them?
Do you trust them? Do you?
At this moment, no, because we don't know what their conditions are. The conditions they have is, as I told you, 3. And that 3 is not acceptable by people of Afghanistan. And when I say people of Afghanistan, let me make it clear. I have in the parliament people from south, from north, from every part of the country, women, everybody. They have the same fear and the same concerns that I have. I cannot generalize situation. Maybe there are certain elements within Afghanistan society that they will sympathy with Taliban because they're afraid of their return, because, you know, for some traditional reasons they may sympathy with Taliban. But there was a research recently, a report released by Asia Foundation. It indicates that only 20 to 25% of Afghan population support the reconciliation and peace process. So this is very low, and this research was basically held in the places where it's the natural bait for Taliban, so to say.
You refer to the current peace talks as the so-called peace talks. You keep saying that. Why do you call them the so-called?
Because I don't believe that this is a peace process. I think it's a talk process or a deal process, but not a peace process. Because a peace has to be inclusive. Like democracy is a process, peace also have to be a process. You need to include different actors in Afghanistan in this process, civil society, women groups, political opponents, institutions of Afghanistan. You cannot, as I said before, you cannot bring one mullah under the name of Talib the other side of the table, and you come as an American the other side and you say it's a peace process. It's not a process. A process has to be start from somewhere and end somewhere with a result.
We have a question here, and then I'll go to the back. Yeah, you go first, and then yeah, I saw you there.
Yeah, my name is, as you know me properly, so my name is Isan Afgham. I'm an Afghan PhD student from SOAS. First of all, I admire your courage, your determination, your struggle in such a difficult and challenging political life in Afghanistan. And you have very rightly mentioned about the barriers for women, like you mentioned about the political part of it, you mentioned about the cultural part of it, you also mentioned about the religious part of it, which is a very dominant factor in Afghanistan, particularly for women and the political life. So for me, given that I have come from an economic background, you have not touched anything on those sort of things. If you look into the statistics for Afghanistan in the last 100 years, you'll find that Afghanistan has been dependent economically on foreign aid assistance. So it's been sort of, as Rubin calls it, sort of the entire state's totally dependent on financial assistance from the donors and from the foreign countries. So given the fact that the troops are leaving, so how are you going to face those challenges of economic part? That's not only a challenge for women, but also for men as well. Thank you.
No, it's very nice to see you, Ustad. We used to call him Ustad because he was also the first to start English classes during Taliban for students. So he had many students as doctors, teachers, and that intellectual part of society. On the question of economical impact of the withdrawal, I think that's also the key, that nobody talks about it. Right now, you know that you have been working in the Central Bank of Afghanistan. You know that only 60% of the internal income covers the regular budget. 40% of the regular budget with all the development budget comes from the foreign aids. Afghanistan is naturally not a poor country. We are a rich country in terms of having natural resources. I mean, we both represent a province which has a lot of natural resources. But other parts of the country also, there are trillions of dollars underground which have never been touched. And there was no proper mechanism put in place in the past 10 years to also use those resources to make Afghanistan economy dependent. So you are right, I mean, independent from foreign aids. You're right, and the concern is for all of us very valid to say that Afghanistan economy is dependent and it may collapse at certain point if the withdrawal happen quickly under pressure. The thing is that in 2001, when the troops came to Afghanistan, they came because the US and UK security was at risk, or the Western security was at risk. Nobody consulted any of us in Afghanistan whether we want them to come. Now that they're leaving because there is a financial crisis and because there is a political thing, you know, because there is the US election, etc. Nobody wants to talk to us to see whether we want them to leave Afghanistan or not. So I think any withdrawal, be it economy or political or military, needs to be based on the ground realities of Afghanistan, because Afghanistan is not the Arab countries, you know, it's different. Security in Afghanistan means security to the world. And you will take this as a granted that if Afghanistan is once again abandoned and forgotten, politically, financially, and military also, without proper end to this conflict, the consequence is going to be very bad on the world security.
There was a lady there at the back.
Hi, my name is Mujahedeen and I'm also an Afghan. It's been about 3 months since I returned from Afghanistan. I'm an investigative journalist for XR News. Have been writing on women's rights lately. Now, I know we've been talking about the advancement of women's rights, but actually talking to activists on the ground and to women on the ground who are fighting for their rights. An example is Batul Muradi, who is a well-known poet from Herat who was forced to drop all her, studies and work and poem writing because of marriage. She's fighting to get her name cleared right now, and no one's paying attention to her. And some of the incidents actually happened right in front of the Human Rights Court. And they turned around and said to her, actually, no, that's part of your culture. We're not going to intervene into this at all. We're not going to help you to get your women's rights or put your voice across. A lot of this system, the law system, I know you've been talking about the women's against rights, violence against rights law, that has been established in 2007. A lot of the laws has been in place, but it seems like the system is sided with men. And if that's how it is right now, where we have so much money put into that and so many people watching Afghanistan and its advancement, and women are struggling to put their voice across and get justice, how is this going to work in 2014 when everyone leaves and people are not going to care about Afghanistan?
Yeah, that's very true. I am aware of the case, you mentioned the name. Lack of rule of law is a problem that not only women but everybody is suffering in Afghanistan. I think Taliban is one side of the problem, but the other side of the problem is lack of good governance, in like a government which is responsible to deliver rule of law, fight corruption, fight poverty, those basic things, the homework, which is nobody's can be blamed for that. No foreign country can be blamed for that. There is a culture of impunity towards perpetrators of women rights violation, and this is something we have been fighting for. Rape, sexual abuse, domestic violence. Many people regard this as a part of culture. That's why in this new law, which was enforced as presidential decree, but we are trying to amend this in the parliament, we put all of these issues as crime in the law, and that's why we are labeled for westernizing laws in Afghanistan. Beating of a woman is crime. Now, if you want to put that as a crime, there are certain men in the parliament that say, oh, Ms. Koofi, I know you are drafting a law which even if I touch my wife, you will put me in jail and you will take me to the court. If you go back to the beginning of Islam, our Prophet, peace be upon him, never beat his wives. As followers, why do we beat our wives? For making small mistakes. Sexual abuse is not defined in our laws, unfortunately. It's regarded as adultery. So we are trying to put all of these issues in the law because we need to have laws. Now, enforcement is another thing, another step. We need to have laws first, and then go for enforcement. So now, approving this law has become a political challenge for me, part of my career challenge. We need to get this law approved, and I hope that once we have the law, then we will go for implementation and enforcing. But you're right that our systems, also those systems that we expect them to be vocal and outspoken about women issues, they become part of this traditional system, They also accept it to be part of the traditional system. There are some efforts also by some countries, some institutions like the USIP, etc., US Peace Institute, to bring the traditional system with the official judiciary system of Afghanistan together, which from my perspective, to strengthen the traditional justice system, which from my perspective is a mistake, because the traditional justice system of Afghanistan is not woman-friendly and not children-friendly. And you have it in Pakistan, I guess. You also have it in FATA area. The women are the main victim because all the councils there are made of men, or the decisions are made by men. Woman is not involved, so it's quick. But the result is not very full of justice. The result is discriminative, and this, I'm not a pro this traditional system. We need to really go to the laws of Afghanistan. You cannot weaken a political system of the country by any other means except that you create two parallel justice processes. We need to go for official justice system, and this is something we are fighting for.
So in your view, is new legislation, is that more important than trying to change people's opinions? Or which one comes first, the law or
the law first, because if you don't have a law, how do you refer to some, you know, you need to have a referral point. We need to have a law and then go for national awareness to make sure that this law is being enforced at the judiciary level, police level, etc. So in this law, we have actually identified 30 kinds of violence, which was regarded as tradition and culture before, which are violence. Honor killing, 30. Honor killing. Simply, people will kill their sisters or their wives, and they say, well, I saw her talking to somebody, and I had all the right to kill her. With honor killing is specifically defined in the civil law of Afghanistan. Nobody takes that serious. So we're trying to put more restriction on honor killing in this new law. There are all those issues that we are worried about it or put in this law. The challenge now is to get it approved.
The gentleman there, and then, yeah, I'll come to you.
Assalamu alaikum. You're very welcome in London, and I certainly hope that your story inspires a generation of women and men in Afghanistan. My question is this: given that we're seeing the withdrawal of NATO, given what was referred to earlier as Afghanistan's dependence on aid, who do you think will be the most important international allies of Afghanistan in the future? And what implications will that have for domestic politics in Afghanistan, and particularly with respect to rights and women's rights? Thank you.
You know that recently the government has signed some strategic partnership with some countries, the UK, France, Italy, etc. In the meantime, there is this vision of Eastern Bloc, so to call it. You know, there are some leaders in Afghanistan that they believe they need to go for creating like Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan bloc. But I don't, you know, given the fact that we didn't have a healthy relations with these countries and not a good experience with these countries, I don't think you will have a lot of support within Afghanistan for this bloc. So I think it's important that we have been the victim of wrong politics of our governments as nation. We're talking as citizens here. And it's not to blame any citizen, any nation, but just our wrong politics of our governments. So I think for that we need to have a longer term strategic partnership with the West, with the Western world. If I may to speak on behalf of Afghanistan, I think that's what should be represented to the world. While some of our leaders represent it the other way. They believe that they want to represent it that Afghanistan is against everybody, against international community, which is not true. In fact, there are mistakes being committed by international community, the night operation, you know, not respecting culture, values, etc. But at the end of the day, even those countries, those individuals who are critics of the way the operations are conducted in Afghanistan, at the end of the day, they still believe that we need to have a strategic partnership, but we need to, you know, have these ties with the world.
I think it was the lady here first. Oh,
Thank you. Yeah. Salam. Zarghona, it is great to see you, and I am the supporter of any Afghan woman to be a president, not only talking about someone like Fawzia Koofi. Yes, I just wanted to ask you to say something about what would be your concerns at the moment from the international community, apart from the women's rights generally in Afghanistan. As you mentioned, it's the geopolitical situation of Afghanistan and the talk with the Taliban. When it comes to Afghanistan, people only try to concentrate more about only women's issues and women's rights. And as you rightly mentioned again, that if we had good governance, I think women's issue is part of it. But if we look at the media, all people present here, we know that even within Western media, in London, we know that there are talks about secularism, atheism, or, you know, religion, and government, like within the government office, should there be, prayers at workplace and all these things. So we shouldn't concentrate too much on this. We should concentrate on a bigger picture in Afghanistan. So I just want to see what is your agenda. If you thought about it, as you say, Afghanistan people cannot have agenda 2 or 3 years before, because we don't know what is going to happen in Afghanistan. So I just want you to.
So your question is what are the big
exactly
what
is the bigger picture? What are the biggest issues?
Apart from
I think the biggest concern would be the future of democracy in Afghanistan. Unlike some people who say that that democracy was imported to Afghanistan and Afghanistan was not ready, I have a different view. And I'm sure you will agree with me that Afghan nation have always been pro-democracy. They might not have democratic institution as such as we have now, but there always been some kind of institutions, some kind of council, some kind of shuras that people will refer. So democracy always had a history in Afghanistan. Civilization always had a history in Afghanistan. It's just the wrong representation of Afghanistan that some people and some countries would like to make in the world. I think the biggest fear I would have would be the future of political system in Afghanistan, how we could keep the current system. That you have been to Afghanistan many times, and I had the honor to do this documentary with you. The people are worried that, once again we go back to those dark periods where people didn't have this chance to speak their mind. Today I was talking to somebody, and the gentleman asked that by then, during Taliban, there was stability. It's true there was stability, but there was no life. So who could bring this life to make it unstable? So I think the key would be, how do we keep the future of democracy in Afghanistan?
The lady there, and then I will come to the back. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Mushkan Ahmed, and I'm an MSc student at SOAS. And just going along with this idea of good governance and governmentality, I looked at your profile before coming here, and you're one of the few people that looked at internal displacement. And I was just asking, how would you propose to sort of tackle the issue of internal displacement within Afghanistan, because it's something that hasn't been, looked at by many other people within Parliament?
You mean internally displaced people?
Yeah, internally displaced people.
The motive behind internally displaced people, IDPs, is so many. First is, of course, poverty. Many people come now to Kabul, especially for jobs. Kabul is a city with capacity of 1.5 million population. Now you have 5 million population, and the city is exploding. You have all that urbanization, which is happening in a wrong way. Also, you have security, which is the motive for IDPs. Many people move because of the insecurity in their regions. There has not been a proper program for them to create jobs for them or reintegrate them into the society. But this is part of many problems the government is suffering from, or Afghans are suffering from.
Is it true to say that as the numbers of internally displaced people have grown, that people have then shifted into other areas, but with those civilians, insurgency has followed also, that it's created insurgency in areas where there wasn't one before, because it's not only civilians who move, it's actually the Taliban moving with them, or it's insurgent groups. Would you agree with that?
I don't think actually internally displaced is one of the reasons for taking insurgency. I think in many places there are other connections. North is relatively a quiet place. I mean, it used to be a quiet place. Now you have growing insurgency in some part of North because of the religious connection, because of like Wahhabism, for instance, or Salafism in some part of North as well, which people still are from the same community, but they have religious connection with some elements of Taliban, so they start supporting Taliban.
We are going to run out of time quite soon, so I'm keen to get as many final questions in as possible. So please, can you keep your questions brief? Nick, is that you at the back there? Oh, okay, sorry, gentleman.
Karim Atifi, a medical practitioner in the UK, coming from Afghanistan as well. Yeah, I'm wishing you well. My question is, it's not necessarily a critique. One of the issues that bothers me all the time is that the very fact that the indigenous anti-Taliban resistance and fighters who used to do superb job for years without involvement of the Western world. Now they have been systematically being disarmed, isolated, taken out of their post systematically. And this is pretty much convincing to most of people down there. This is because of a hidden, unannounced motivation and agenda by ruling political elite around President Karzai, who, by the way, come from a specific ethnic group from the south, and any anti-Taliban movement and resistant and ideology is too difficult for them to resist, so they could go to any extent to eliminate them. What bothers me, why our political leaders do not have the gut and the stomach to talk about this publicly and let the world know. For God's sake, there are many, many examples. Look at our leaders. They get killed one after another, all from the north, from a specific ethnic group. And they are just being paralyzed.
So your point is that...
Yeah, my point is that this basically naturally creates dependency to the Western world and NATO. Why disable the local resistance to create a dependency?
I think it was a comment, but a very good comment, very strong. I totally agree with you that there were certain elements who have been involved in conflict and war before, particularly resistant against Taliban. They have gone through different processes, DDR, Dayak, to disarm them. They have accepted Constitution of Afghanistan. You know, they were part of this process of democracy. And I think it will be unfair to say that they are the troublemakers. I agree with you on that.
Thank you. My name's James, in fact, and I wanted to ask about natural resources, as you mentioned it to be possibly a key for the economy. The crown jewels, to some degree, have already gone to China, who have done nothing in 4 years. The Indian government took the Hajigak iron ore deposit a few weeks ago. There's a lot more tenders coming up, and given conflicting stakeholder interests, there are very few examples around the world of developing countries who have truly benefited from their natural resources. Can I ask you why perhaps you have faith in the natural resources for development?
Could you, when you answer that question, Fawzia, could you tell people what the natural resources are? Because I think a lot of people don't know what is there in Afghanistan.
Well, luckily, we're a country which has three main economic potential. The first is the geographical location of Afghanistan, because Afghanistan could connect South Asia with Central Asia. And the TAPI pipeline, the Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Pakistan, India pipeline, is just one of the example of economic growth. Then we have different kinds of mine, you know, lots of mine. Alone in my province, there is this famous lapis lazuli mine, a golden mine, iron, different kinds of mine, which has not been touched. You're right, because the corruption, the lack of a mechanism to properly utilize these resources has been one of the reasons that nobody wants to talk about it. Because we believe, you know, with this corruption and everything, a lot of political mafia which is controlling Afghanistan economy, and an economical mafia, we might not be able to make the proper use of it. But what I'm saying is, in the longer term, these are the potential. Afghanistan is not like many of those African countries where there is this, you know, chronic poverty. It's not like that. Afghanistan has potential growth also for tourism. I mean, security is a challenge, but rather than that, Afghanistan has a lot of potential for tourism. So I think there should be a mechanism to properly utilize those. Two of the mines so far have been contracted with China and with India. You know, the Chinese have, of course, a lot of economy interest in Afghanistan, and they would like to get involved. But I think you need to properly use the mines of Afghanistan so that it doesn't fall in the wrong hands on one hand, and on the other hand, it could create jobs for the people. Because in many occasions, these mines have been illegally used by different power breakers in Afghanistan.
How would you go about, if you were president, protecting those natural resources or protecting the Afghans' access to those?
I think we need to have a proper mechanism to prioritize the exploiting those mines. What is the, you know, the best policy for that is to prioritize them and their use and use them locally, using the local people, local individuals. I know that, for instance, Indians were killed, some Indians a few months ago, they were killed, and Chinese were killed. You know, it's better to have use the manpower of Afghanistan, even if it's awarded to a foreign country, but create jobs inside Afghanistan and prioritize in terms of which one is the first to be utilized. Right now, there is a lack of mechanism for utilizing properly, you know, exploiting the mines. And I think we need to, if we really want to have a sustainable economic growth in Afghanistan, that's the key, to use natural resources of Afghanistan and use it properly. Use it through a mechanism which is transparent. You know, everybody is aware of the contracts, conditions, and, you know, the manpower is local manpower. These are the preconditions for creating jobs and proper use of the mines.
There's a question here.
Yeah, sure. Our political leaders, I think, pay tens of thousands of pounds to communications agencies to communicate as effectively as you have today, so good on you. My question is very simple, just are there bits of Western democracy which you would reject, and what would they be? As someone who's never likely to have much involvement with Afghanistani politics, but might have some involvement here, I'd be interested to know your perspective from the front line, given that's where we are.
Honestly speaking, I don't know much about the Western democracy, so I cannot say which part of is not good, but...
Very diplomatic.
Let me live in the UK for some times, and then I will be able to criticize it.
Hi, my name's Lizzie White. Very lovely to see you again.
Hi.
Documentary filmmaker. Fawzia, can you just say where you might feel optimistic about building sort of progressive alliances in preparation for running for president and offering an alternative to the hegemony of Karzai?
If I explain the social situation in Afghanistan, Afghanistan is divided into two parts. One is this part where they're pro-democracy, pro-progress, you know, they want to move forward, they want to keep the current situation and make it better, move forward. They're young generation, they're women, they're intellectuals, they're people who are living in the cities and in the rural areas, uneducated people. This is the hope for people like me. We need to mobilize them. We need to give them some encouragement. We need to, you know, promote their voices. And they can, and if you really honestly speak on their behalf, they will get your message.
We've got time for just a few more questions, so one at the front here, if you can. And please, everybody, try to keep your questions brief so that we can.
Hi there, my name's Hannah Stanton, and I'm a journalist, and I actually set up a website called ourothersisters.com, which is an exploration of feminism in the Arab world. So I was quite interested to hear your comments about whether you consider yourself a feminist. And we've spoken to sort of a lot of women through events at the Frontline Club to do with the Arab Spring, who have said that they believe that feminism and Islam can coincide and it can be a harmonious relationship, and it is to do with interpretation. So firstly, I thought that was quite interesting. But speaking to sort of a room of journalists, and as a woman yourself, what stereotypes do you think we can, or how can we talk about your plight and the Afghan plight in the Western media and avoid stereotypes of Afghani women? It was something you touched on earlier. What would your message be to us as the Western media?
So what would the message be to the Western media to avoid stereotyping Afghan women? And what are the ways in which you think Afghan women are stereotyped?
Something that happened in the past few years, and nobody talks about it, is the societal change of perspectives towards women, and also the perspectives of women. The knowledge and the awareness that they have got, I think this is something you cannot measure it. No media can report about it because this is a societal change that happened in Afghanistan. I will give you an example. in the last, in 2010 parliamentary election, according to the quota, from each province at least there should be one female representative in the parliament. But there is a province in the southwest, it's bordered with Iran, it's one of the conservative provinces, Nimruz. From that province, they had 2 seats, one for man, one for woman. But both seats were managed to be, women managed to win both seats. So they have that province has no man being represented in the parliament, in the lower house and in the upper house. I don't think there was any American or British people who motivate people to vote for a woman. This was a perspective change. First of all, it was a strength of the woman, determination of the woman candidate who managed to defeat man. And secondly, it was the awareness of the community and the perspective change and the acceptance of community towards the woman. And this is something which makes me hopeful and makes me, move forward.
Do you think that type of social change can be imposed by the international community, or it's something that has to come from within families, from within Afghans themselves?
I think it's important that changes should come from inside the society, because if changes come from inside the society, they're more sustainable. They can long last. But we need to certainly have the world has an international obligation. We need to support core principes, and the world. If we don't have strong support and networking by our sisters and friends internationally, certainly our voices will be heard so low. But changes will still happen. I don't think for women's rights, I want somebody in the UK or in the US to talk on my behalf. I have enough determination, enough courage to talk on behalf of women of Afghanistan. But what we need is some kind of networking and partnership from the world.
If you take the example of your own family, your mother was an illiterate woman, one of 7 wives. You got yourself an education, you're now a member of parliament. Your daughters will probably go to university overseas. So in the space of 3 generations, there has been tremendous change in your family. Do you think the example of your family is representative across Afghanistan?
I think in many societies, yes, because even you give very good example, but I will give another example my father was the first who established a school in our village, but he never allowed his girls to go to school. From the same village, now people come to me, and there was some BBC journalists in Kabul who came to this meetings that I had with these people. From the same community, this conservative part of the society where, they never allowed their girls to go to school. Now they come to me asking for a girls' school in their village. They allow their girls to go to school, walk for 2 hours. Back by then, my mother, for instance, was afraid of sending my brothers to school. So she will hide my brothers from going to school initially, but later on she sent me. And now in the same community, people come asking for girls' school, and I think that's a change of, despite the fact that there is risk of security, that there is lack of accessibility to quality education, that there is, fear of being kidnapped on the way, etc., etc., but still family send their girls to school, and I think, most of that goes to the women of the family. They encourage the girls to go to school.
Just a very quick question. How do you plan to win the men's votes on the coming election?
How will you get men to support you?
In the last 2 elections I had in Afghanistan, not all my votes are from women. There were also men who supported me. There is a difference. In 2005, only those women who voted for me, that their men voted for me. So the women were listening to the men. While in 2010, women who voted for me, not necessarily their man voted for me. So they were convinced enough. Sometimes they had to convince their husbands, but women decided independently to vote for me. And their justification was very basic and very rational. They were telling their man that at least she can provide a one-time meal for us. That means she can do something for us. So we will go for her. All these big leaders, they don't do anything. They didn't provide job for us, etc. But at least she can provide a one-time meal. That's an expression, one-time meal for us. And so to mobilize men of the family, you need to mobilize women. They could become a force to their husband and brothers to change their mind.
My name is Dina Solomon. I'm an Egyptian living here. Obviously, as you realize we're going through slight changes ourselves back home. I'm sitting here very fascinated and full of admiration of your courage. And I had a question, which is about, you have a very powerful message, you're a very strong character and full of determination. But at the end of the day, you're talking to an audience, and this audience have to have kind of the same language and the same level of understanding so that the message can come across. Do you feel confident that your ability to communicate with your level of education will reach through to all levels of the society, or will it get stuck? We have an example in Egypt with Dr. Baradi, for example, where there is a message that's very good, but then it doesn't infiltrate.
Doesn't go to the community. So you're asking, can she talk to people at grassroots level, at community level?
Exactly.
Yeah, I think one of the journalists, a friend of mine, who had a review of my book in
Jerome.
Yeah.
I think yes. Jerome.
Is he here?
Jerome,
yeah, you're here. Okay, good.
Jerome
in
Starkey
his
from the
review,
Times.
which I'm upset about it, what he said was, you know, it was so nice to reply his text messages in the middle of the night, but he still had not a good review of my book. I'm just teasing. In his book, what he said was that despite being very progressive, but Ms. Koofi still could be a grandmother in a village. You know,
I think in another life she could have been an Afghan. By now she would be a grandmother living in a village. But
exactly. So I think in the difference of my politics is that I'm not just talking to the Western audiences or to the taxpayers, but also to the community. And I'm representing some of the poor and marginalized community in the parliament. It's very hard to reach to some of those communities. I mean, I have these people from my province. To get to some of those villages, you have to walk for 1 week, taking horse or donkey. Not only I have done that, but my daughters also have done that. They have been taking horses and donkeys with me to go to the villages and to communicate people. And to be honest, I have gone to the villages and to the communities that I don't think many main politicians managed to go there. I have almost traveled all around the country. And I think, I believe that message have to come from, villages have always been in Afghanistan a center of revolution. If something has started, it had to start from the village. You know, even the 1975-76 revolution started from the villages. So you need to communicate to the villages, you need to go to the villages, you need to see what the problems people are suffering. Although it's very difficult to make yourself known to everybody, I'll tell you a story about it. I went to one of these villages in a rural community, and I was, of course, wearing big scarf and like ordinary woman there. And I was talking to this lady that she was fetching water, and I told her, who built this water for you? Because I helped them. She said, there is this lady in the parliament, I don't know her, but I think her name is, like, she mentioned my name. And I said, does she come to see you? She said, no, she doesn't come, but she does a lot of help, so that's okay if she doesn't come. When I was sitting in the car, this one of my staff said that the lady you're talking about, this is the lady. So he was like teasing, you know, trying to follow my car, offering fruit and food, because that's the tradition in Afghanistan. You have to go and see the family and then have food and have fruit in every stop you have. So I think that's a very successful strategy. If you're disconnected with your people, then certainly you will get, you will not bring changes. You need to be connected to your society. That's how changes will happen. I mean, I try to spend most of my time in the villages, among the women. I try to also go to some other parts of the country, like East. And recently, when I was in East part of the country, on the way I was attacked by Taliban. But speaking to the woman in Pashto, in that part of the society in East, they were speaking with me in Pashto, and they were saying, it's good to see you alive, because we usually see you on TV. It's good to see you alive. And so there is that connection with the woman in particular, but with the society. And I think that's the key. If you are not connected to your people, then you will not be successful in your politics. And I think I don't like that kind of politician who is behind the closed doors. You need to be with your people. You cannot certainly make everybody happy. You cannot be able to meet all the expectations, because the expectations are so, you know, different. But at least you need to be connected. And the good thing is, in our world, in Eastern world, people are so emotional. If you work with them honestly, even if you don't make a big difference, but you are honest to them, they understand that. they understand that you're making your best efforts. It doesn't find its way, it's okay, but they will understand you. So I think for any politician, and especially for those who really want to have a long way in politics, they need to be connected to their people.
We need to wrap up now, Fawzia, but very quickly, what is your sort of big wish for Afghanistan, and what is your biggest fear for the next couple of years?
The big wish for me would be to represent an Afghanistan, as I said in the beginning, that does not only produce war and terrorism, that produce culture, that produce friendship, that could be a reliable partner to the world and to its citizen. And the biggest fear is a personal fear. The biggest fear I have is that I will be misinterpreted to what I am to my people and to my supporters.
Can you sum yourself up quickly? I'd like you to sum yourself up in 5 words. How do you see yourself?
Okay, it's very difficult. I mean, how should I put it? Can you help me with that? A honest friend, a serious person, a committed mother. How many words? More than 5?
You have another 2 left. That was.